Earth Optimism by Folklife. The title of that program is Inspiring Conservation Communities. It invites visitors to explore the possibilities and solutions that address some of our planet's most significant challenges through new ways of living, learning from each other, and working together for shared sustainable future. Earth Optimism is a Smithsonian movement that focuses on changing the narrative from doom to gloom to hope, inspiring action and mobilizing a global community. In this program, you can learn how to make an impact on local to global scale through workshops, performances, interactive art installations, film screenings, hands-on educational activities, cooking and gardening demonstrations, sustainable food concessions, and even more. And this show is put together by several different organizations besides the Folklife Festival, and I'm going to invite the Material Culture Forum to come up, our leaders for that committee and or forum, and introduce themselves.
Welcome everyone. My name is Michelle Delaney. I'm co-chair, one of the co-chairs of Material Culture Forum. We've been around since 1988, and boy are we happy to relaunch after COVID and all that we've been through over the last couple of years, and see you all in person outside of the festival. Thank you, Mary and festival team, and inside now, collaborating with the sustainability group for Smithsonian. So what we do is try to bring scholars from across the Smithsonian museums, the libraries, the archives, the research centers together and explore interdisciplinary topics that relate to our collections, our buildings, and our staff. And so we're very happy to say that we are truly one Smithsonian, and especially in our collaboration today. So, the Material Culture Forum is a volunteer committee. We're about 20 or a little over 20 strong from many of the Smithsonian units. So I want to let my co-chair Jennifer take over from here.
Well, hello, I'm Jennifer Zazo-Brown, as Michelle mentioned, one of the co-chairs of the Material Culture Forum. And again, it is just so exciting to be back in person and to be relaunching the forum. We've had a lot of conversations over the last 2 years about Material Culture Forum and how do we continue to keep this group relevant, and some of the things that we've been working on during the break from during COVID is really just rebranding and the Material Culture Forum, helping to bring that back to the Smithsonian community. We've created a logo for our group. We've created the first public-facing website, so if you have not had a chance to visit our website, please check it out. We have been working on documenting the last 30 plus years of what the Material Culture Forum has done as a group at the Smithsonian, and we'll be continuing to add to the material that's on that website as we're able to get back into the archives and digitize some of the older forums, but the most recent ones have been added up there. And we've been, talking a lot about, what are ways in which the forum can take new shape. And so this collaboration with Folklife and also with the sustainability group or the environmental group that Smithsonian-wide that's recently come together has been an opportunity to think about a new format. And it's the first time that the Material Culture Forum has been at Folklife, so that's really exciting. Lastly, I'd just like to say that we are always looking for new members on our committee. So if the Material Culture Forum is something that you're interested in, you've had an opportunity to attend some of our programs before, or if this is the first time that you're attending, again, welcome. But please feel free to reach out to Michelle and I through our website. We'd love to talk to you a little bit more about joining the group, or also if you ever have any ideas for a forum that you'd like to bring to the Smithsonian, we'd be happy to chat about that as well. So I'm good. Okay, one more thing.
One more thing to say, and we should do it together. This is also sponsored by Smithsonian 175. We want to thank them so much, all of our castle leaders, for funding us for a full year of about 4 programs. We're going to continue, even though 175 officially might be over August 10th, we're going to keep on running these in-person and virtual programs for the next year. So please come out and join us as we put together these additional programs.
Thank you.
Mary will be moderating.
I will be moderating. Yes, it's a great group. That's how a linguist who works with intangible cultural heritage ended up on the Material Culture Forum. Okay, we also have another partner, which is the Smithsonian Institution's Climate Collaborators. They helped us get together this great panel today. So I'm going to introduce you guys as you walk up on stage. That's okay? So we have Nancy Bechtel from Facilities, and she brings to us the idea of greening the Smithsonian campus, how we build, maintain, and run our spaces, which is part of Climate Solutions. Also Rebecca Koskowski, who is from the Material Conservation Institute, MCI, who care for our collections in Suitland, Maryland, and she's looking at reducing our carbon footprint one object at a time. Mike Lawrence from Exhibits, looking at how exhibits that inspire new generations, how inspire millions of museum exhibit visitors about climate solutions. Catherine Blanchard, who comes to us from the Smithsonian Science Education Center. She brings to us education for a bright and green future. Hi, anywhere. I guess I'm gonna stand. And community, and Katrina Lashley from the Anacostia Community Museum in Anacostia, Maryland, community engagement in Washington, D.C. And if you kind of noticed, we did this from well, the buildings are really large, but really the interior part of the Smithsonian in the museums, the collections, and how we do exhibits, to the more outward-facing part through education, community programming, and exhibits as well. Mike, you're well placed in the middle because you kind of do both, right? So I'm going to have each of them introduce themselves a little bit more, and then I'll have some questions for them, and then we'll open up to questions from the audience.
Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, so good morning everyone. My name is Katrina Lashley. I'm Program Coordinator of Urban Waterways at ACM. So just a quick overview, Urban Waterways is currently a project that's 12th year. We've been exploring and documenting the relationship between urban communities and their waterways. The core of the project looks at the relationship between DC and its second river, the Anacostia River, which, as you know, is the dividing line of the city between east and west, but also is the dividing line in multiple ways. So the Anacostia has often been on the list of, some of the most polluted rivers in the country, nicknamed the Forgotten River. Dr. Gail Rowe, who is senior historian at ACM for many years, was very interested in exploring what does it mean when the river is forgotten, when it's invisible in the urban landscape, but what does it really mean for the people, the communities living along its banks. So the goal really of the project is to acknowledge that communities are made up of blue spaces, green spaces, and gray spaces, and that there's an ongoing relationship between people and their waterways. The goal really is to kind of explore an environmental history from multiple kind of perspectives. So if this is a relationship, you want to explore, you can explore the kind of revitalization of the Anacostia from restoration, conservation, waterfront development, but also history, faith, power, justice, race, class, to name a few. So the first goal of the project has been to break down silos. So make sure that disciplines are meeting and interconnecting, but also break down silos of geography. So when we focus on the Anacostia in DC, we also have partnerships with other communities, other waterways, both nationally and internationally. Second goal is to document as much as possible the ongoing relationship between various stakeholders in DC, how they connect the waterway, how they're stewarding the waterway, oral histories, photographic documentation, and thirdly, of course, to engage. So how do we engage our community partners, the exhibitions, river tours, community forums, focus groups, project newsletters, and 3 national convenings. So very happy to be here this morning.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me this morning. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this group. My name is Catherine Blanchard. I am the Assistant Division Director for Professional Services at the Smithsonian Science Education Center. So our center is the only group at the Smithsonian that's primarily focused on formal education. So we're focused on what's happening in K through 12 classrooms, what students are learning, how teachers are teaching it, and on how education systems grow and move and change and serve their students. So the group that I work for primarily focuses on kind of the outward-facing side of that, how we're going out and interacting with communities. But today I'm here representing our sustainability group, which fosters a project called the Smithsonian Science for Global Goals Project. So this was a project that began in 2016 at a moment when the UN Sustainable Development Goals were emerging, and also when a lot of our traditional science educators and scientists were starting to think about how we create science education that serves the future. So not only teaching our students what science is, but how to take that and apply it to real life situations to make change both in their own local communities, but on a global level level as well. We've put together the Smithsonian Science for Global Goals project, which is really focused on helping students ages 8 to 18 to discover what these big global issues are and what that looks like in their communities, to understand the science that underpins these big global issues, to be able to really understand how they operate, how they work, how systems change, and then eventually to be able to take action on those things. So being able to create change and be those change makers for the future. Thank you. So glad to be here.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Lawrence. I'm the Assistant Director for Exhibits here at the Natural History Museum. Yes, it is one of the sweetest jobs in the world because I get to work with a fabulous team to put on display incredible things and to hope to make connections with our audience. You know, in generations past, there was a bit of a field of dreams attitude about exhibits. You know, if you build it, they will come. And when you have 5+ million people a year coming through the doors, that was kind of good enough, right? We rely on ticket sales, luckily in that regard. But in the past decade and more, that model has completely transformed. And now an exhibit is just one part of a multi-pronged public engagement program, which includes education, communications, and increasingly some form of digital outreach. It's important to us now that people find themselves in the museum, just as identification and relevance is so important in all other aspects of our lives. It's increasingly important in the world of exhibits, especially here at Natural History, where we are so close to the pressing issues of our time, of climate change and biodiversity loss and conservation and so on. And we know that as we get to know more about our audiences, which are varied and diverse, as you know, that come through the doors, that people look for not only answers, but a chance to converse. They don't always come to us as the voice of authority, which was a position that we all kind of relished in generations past, but rather as a forum, as a place to talk amongst themselves, to talk with others, and hopefully to leave something of themselves behind. So our exhibits now more and more are focusing on that. First of all, on the incredible things in our collection and the stories they have to tell. You know, still the greatest majority of people in surveys come here to see remarkable things, and of course we don't want to disappoint that. We only have about 146.7 million to choose from, so we don't think we'll run out of options anytime soon. But also, like, how does this connect to me and the many me's? You know, me as a social being, me as an individual being, me as a member of a family and a community, me as a grandparent who's concerned about my grandchildren's future. And so I would say that our challenge now is not so much to build it and let them come, but rather to be a place that people want to come to, where they know that between the things that they see, what they have an opportunity to learn, what they have an opportunity to share within their experience here is really a full package of personal relevance and motivation. One of our biggest challenges is, what do people do when they leave? We don't know, and it's hard to know. You know, we don't have a huge email database where people can come back again because we don't sell tickets and we don't have that. So we're trying more and more to do audience investigation to find out what do people leave with, were they inspired to do something, and more important, did they do something? So a huge focus of our work in the next few years is that giving people information, but information isn't as important as, frankly, a lot of our scientists like to think. Nobody who comes through the door cares how many parts per billion of CO2 are, yeah, it's important. The information needs to be there, but it's more about touching people's hearts. I've seen an impact in my neighborhood. The place I used to go fish with my grandfather is now brackish. We used to pull great trout out of that stream or those sorts of things. So it's that connection, getting to know people, giving them that chance, and more and more, hopefully, giving them agency to do something, to connect with other people. I'm thinking of the Waterways program, incredible community programs where you can actually get past that feeling, I'm just one person, what can I do, to I'm part of a community and we can do great things. So that's really the challenge that we face. And you realize I haven't talked much about objects, and objects are, in a way, the evidence of what we show. objects are the gateway, engagement, and excitement for people. You know, you can tell a story about a dinosaur, you can tell it about the giant hunk of quartz that's out there in the lobby, you can tell it, but also through so many other ways that we are trying to connect and learn from people. So that's our mission, that's our goal, and you know, those of you who are regulars here, I'd love to hear your thoughts if you think that we're achieving that. So thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Becky Keskowski. I'm the preventive conservator at the Museum Conservation Institute, and we're a small unit that serves all of the museums and research centers across Smithsonian. As a conservator, I'm part of the collection care community, so all of us here that steward our amazing collections. And as a conservator, we're more involved with the physical care of collections and understanding the material science surrounding preservation. Now, what makes me a little bit different than some of my colleagues that are in different specialties in conservation is rather than working on individual objects and performing interventive treatments like painting restoration or textiles, my focus in preventive is looking at collections holistically. So we have a framework for trying to identify and mitigate threats to long-term preservation of our collections. So some of these might be kind of obvious, looking for threats for water or pest infestation, fire, physical forces like earthquakes. So of course, the climate change is one of these major threats that we are trying to respond to now. So with this framework, the compounding factor that we've been incorporating is sustainability, of course. We can come up with strategies, of course, to protect things for long-term preservation, but if we're not considering how sustainable that solution is, it may not actually contribute to long-term preservation. So we could dictate that we see a material response to our collections, or the material stability could be at 70 degrees and 50% relative humidity. But if we can't actually achieve that, or if it's harming the environment, or if it's economically unsustainable, that doesn't actually help us for preservation. So a lot of what my work is doing is looking at both the material side of what can objects actually tolerate, what kind of environments do they need, but also let's re-examine how are we storing things, how are we moving things, can we protect things more on an object level that can allow us to be more what we call passively controlling the environment, so we're actually reducing our carbon footprint and expenditure on electricity, etc. I'm sure I could tell you a whole lot more, but I want to be able to give Nancy a chance, so that's what I do in a nutshell.
I think everyone can tell from these extended introductions just how vast the jobs are up on the stage, but also in the Smithsonian period, right? Nancy Bechtel, I'm here today representing Smithsonian Facilities. Have the pleasure, sheer pleasure, of trying to lead our facilities organization to be as absolutely green as possible. And that is in the design and construction of new buildings or the revitalization of existing buildings. That also includes our operations and maintenance, how we maintain these buildings to try to save as much carbon emission as possible and to try to be as healthy as possible inside these spaces. And then also just the greening of spaces and everything that the Smithsonian Gardens organization does to try to just increase the use of plants, bringing them inside, outside, every square inch. So just a fabulous job, and happy to be here today. And I just want to give a huge shout out to our Material Culture Forum, also to our Folk Life organization, and just every single person in this audience and every single person that's able to hear this recording, if it's being recorded. There are so many individuals that are out there trying to green our planet, and every little piece of activity that every employee does, as well as our visitors and our volunteers and students, it all makes a difference.
Thank you. So I have a question for you, actually, Nancy, first. You might have heard of what a LEED certification is for a building, and I know that the building Capitol Gallery that the Center for Folk Life and Cultural Heritage is in is a LEED certified building. Can you talk about what a LEED certification is and its relationship to the Smithsonian?
Absolutely, and it sort of involves all spaces, even our exhibitions are LEED certified. We have interior spaces. We redo office quarters. As a matter of fact, in this building, the director's quarter that was done pretty recently is also LEED certified. So LEED is the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, and it is actually a certification program that is run by the U.S. Building, the Green Building Council. And it is just a chosen system to sort of force, really, the Smithsonian to maximize its greening decisions. And so when we're out there doing a new build, or perhaps we're just doing a revitalization, it really forces us to try to make that building as sustainable as possible. LEED also does an operations and maintenance piece. It's called LEED EB, which is an existing building certification. That guarantees that you are operating and running that building as green as possible. And then, of course, in the landscape, there are sustainable site LEED certifications that you can try to do in the landscape so that you're reusing that rainwater or using plants that are not invasive. It's just some examples. It is not the end all, right? But it is a place to really start, I think, and it's been successful, I think, for the institution.
Yes, I think Cap Gallery has a herb garden on the roof, which is nice. And then also the fact that we have a metro station coming right out. So it means that a lot of us commute, we don't drive, and I think that actually goes into the certification as well. So yeah. I'm going to go back to you, Katrina. Can you tell me a little bit more about how the humanities and the social sciences has to do with the work that you do and with climate change? Because we often think of the sciences, but not always the humanities.
Thank you. Yes, looking at our work through a humanities framework, I would say really opens up environmental spaces. It allows, I would say, for a broad definition of environment and what environmentalism is and who can or should be or who has the right to claim the term environmentalist. I would say that working with community partners very early on, having these formal and informal conversations, formal documentation, we realized that communities were thinking about the environment in multiple ways. They define their relationship to the environment in multiple ways. And for many of them, it was very much through this lived experience of the everyday. So when we use the humanities framework, it allows more doorways or pathways for people to see themselves, their history, expertise, their understanding of stewardship, conservation, of connection to place, where they feel they can add to the conversation, add to efforts to, I would say, address various environmental issues, challenges, for example, climate change. I think it allows people to also, I would say, connect to these environmental issues at a personal, human level. It allows them to kind of recognize how scientific research sits in the context of the everyday, right? And so I would say it allows people to kind of connect to, you've described it in various ways, as the ecology that they belong to, this chain of being, the family tree, where they kind of see themselves, what's my obligation, what's my role to play in the stewardship of this larger space. And certainly it provides, I would say, a more, equitable, a more engaging or more familiar space where people can say, okay, I care about my culture, the food I eat, the music we play, or simply, do we have a green space where I just go and read, where they say, oh wait, I'm an artist, I am a writer, I am a poet, I love history, or I am a biologist, but I also love history, music, and art. And so it allows people to understand that everything that makes them buzz, every skill expertise that they have, the humanities framework allows them to say, okay, I have a place, a stake in this conversation, in these spaces. And so they feel more comfortable stepping into these conversations.
I want to ask you another question, and it's kind of related with Mike, but to me, having the task of educating the next generation is both exciting and also very overwhelming. So how do you really engage the younger generations in these issues?
Absolutely. So I'm going to refer back to a lot of what Katrina just said. Part of the way that we do this is bringing together the science and the social science. So helping people to understand what's already going on, that they're seeing, that they're doing, that they're experiencing every day, and how those things can be connected to the scientific investigations and changes that need to be made to create a more sustainable world. So bringing those two things together is really kind of the nexus of our Smithsonian Science for Global Goals project. It also is a really great opportunity to kind of de-silo education. You know, when all of us were in high school, we were taking math, and we were taking science, and we were taking English, but we weren't necessarily seeing the connection between those things. And we live in an interconnected world, and young people understand that. And so why are we siloing out, you know, all these different subjects when really we can bring them together? So you might be doing an oral history survey of people in your community, maybe seeing how the environmental landscape has changed over the past 50 years by interviewing people who are significantly older than you, interviewing people who are, you know, your parents' age, interviewing your peers. But in that process, you're also collecting these amazing stories of the history of your community. You are getting the opportunity to build those community connections with others, and you're really getting the opportunity to also assess what your community might need, what it might benefit from in that moment, as things have changed over time, being able to kind of see what has happened. And so while it's daunting to you know, be responsible for teaching the next generation of students, which I personally don't feel responsible for, but I'm helping other people do that really well, it's a real opportunity to help young people be a part of the conversation, to not feel like this is a world that we're kind of gonna hand them eventually that is probably not as awesome as it should be, definitely not as awesome as it should be, but instead that they're a part of this from the moment that they're in right now, not that they're not a part of the conversation until they become 18 and can vote, or until they can run for office.
I do have some other questions here.
Becky.
I think it might be the hardest for people to understand how conservation really connects with the environment and the change. I was wondering if you could maybe give an example of one collection or part of the collection, or even an object that you really has changed the way you've interacted with it and the way you've had to conserve it because of changes. That wasn't a question she gave you beforehand. I might have stopped it. Or a success story of something that has worked out really well.
It's already trying to stop me. So I am a preventive conservator. I was trained as an object conservator and did a lot of training and experience here at the Natural Science Museum. And so a lot of my work has been related to looking at big collections. Mike told us the scope, 146.7 million, and I think 142 million are actually this museum's. And yeah, most of them in smallage, but that's all right. But I've had the great opportunity to work with collection species that are endangered, extirpated, extinct, and had the opportunity to be able to interact with them in a way that was deliberate and a real investigation into trying to understand how can I interact with this object or specimen to make sure that my intervention isn't changing fundamentally what is here. It doesn't eliminate the ability for scientists or other stakeholders, community stakeholders, to be able to ask questions of this specimen and have them answered in the future. So, for example, if you go up to Objects of Wonder, there is a little rock wallaby that is a little taxidermy specimen that I treated several years ago, and he came from the Wilkes expedition, which is one of the founding expeditions of the Smithsonian collection. And you know, what was so magical about treating it is that if you look at it, it's in this really adorable but stilted pose. It looks nothing like a real wallaby does. And when you start understanding the history of it, it's that they had a taxidermist on board, but he didn't actually see it in the wild alive. So he was doing his best to try to understand what this object or this animal should look like. And so it's really an interesting thing to see the evolution of our understanding, and then trying to preserve that, but we can tell that story. My treatment didn't try to make it look real or make it look new. I wanted it to look, with consultation with the curators and collection managers, I wanted it to look like it did when it was collected, so we could tell that story, so we could tell the story of how science has evolved.
That wasn't so hard. Now I want to run upstairs and look at it. So Mike, looking at impact of the exhibits, looking at impact in all of our work is really difficult. I am looking at the impact of how communities working to revitalize their languages, the other kinds of impact language work has in working in the landscape, the environment, health, all of these other issues. But trying to find that impact is hard, and you talked about wanting to do that in the next couple of years. So how are you going to go about, or how do you plan to go about trying to find out that information, the kind of short-term impact and the long-term impact?
Thank you. I might steal a phrase that Becky just said, and that's the evolution of understanding. I think that's what we're all facing. So I'll mention a few exhibits. So we have our fossil hall, which is called Deep Time. A century ago, that same hall was called the Hall of Extinct Monsters, right? So extinct, long gone, has nothing to do with us. Monsters, bizarre, strange, has nothing to do with us. I think now we are maybe the only fossil hall in the world that starts 4.6 billion years ago, but actually ends in the future, because everything is connected, and everything, as the archive says, what's past is prologue, ignore history at your peril, all that, and all is cyclical. And so that's part of what we hope to have people understand is kind of the cyclic nature of the world, of the natural world, where we are within the cycle, how it's impacting us, and hopefully what we can do about it. I'll kind of get to the evaluation in just a moment, but I also want to mention a couple other exhibits. One is the outbreak exhibit, which is on epidemics and the spread of that. When we started that many years ago, it was intended as marking the centenary of the so-called Spanish flu, the influenza pandemic of 1918. When we started that exhibit, the biggest problem in the world was Zika. Does anybody talk about Zika anymore? No, because something else came along which has distracted us. And even though we didn't have a crystal ball, we certainly didn't predict COVID, that exhibit has had such an enormous impact on so many people. Think of the millions of people that have come through since May of 2018. We've extended that exhibit a couple of times. We also have a free version of it, which we call the do-it-yourself exhibit, which any organization, museum, health clinic, neighborhood, library, school can download the exhibit, plus the media, plus 3D scans of virus models, absolutely free. And it's been an incredible model. It's in 500 venues, up to almost 500 venues around the world, everywhere from universities to a health clinic in Yemen to a major exhibit in Singapore, and we've gotten remarkable feedback from it of the impact that exhibits have had. So we're trying to do more and more like what is that impact by doing what we call formative and post-evaluation. So we evaluate an exhibit while it's in formation with focus groups with our intended audience, and then we have summative evaluations when the exhibit opens, and then we, as much as possible, try to find ways that we can correct things that maybe don't communicate as well as we hoped within the exhibit. So even though the exhibit opens, we think that it's kind of never really done. Another way that we're trying is to get the public connection right from the start. So I'll mention an upcoming exhibit actually opens on the 1st. It's called Our Places. It's really a landmark kind of project for us in that it's an exhibit that's never done. It's about people's connection with place. It has personal stories involved, both from our scientists, like how do they become interested in what they're interested in, what place, what do those places mean to them. It has to do with community members that we've engaged with from around the country. And our visitors, as they come in, we want their feedback too. What places are meaningful to you? And maybe we'll take your story and incorporate it in the exhibit in the course of its 2 or 3 year run. So it really kind of bridges all the things we've been talking about. Information, community engagement, personal relevance, and agency to kind of bring about change. So we're investing more and more in evaluation, more and more in follow-up, and more in that kind of outreach, that extended outreach, both through the exhibits, through educational programs, and through all of our digital connections with exhibits.
Great, thank you. Let's